Have you ever looked around and wondered why more super smart people don't just start their own companies? Well, today we're going to dive deep into a classic essay by Paul Graham. It's called Why to Not Start a Startup. And it's all about digging into those hidden fears and, let's be honest, the totally bogus excuses that might be holding you back. So let's jump right in. And this right here, this is the central question of his whole piece. I mean, think about it. Startups can be incredibly rewarding, right? The upside is huge, but so few people who are totally qualified ever actually do it. Why is that? To get to the bottom of this, Graham looked at something really interesting. The results from the very first group of founders who went through his accelerator, Y Combinator. Okay, look at this. 0%. What is that? That's how many founders from Y Combinator's very first batch regretted it. Even the ones whose companies completely failed, not one of them said, "Man, I wish I just gotten a regular job." Just let that sink in for a second. That's a game-changing number, right? And that's what he calls the startup paradox. You've got this massive upside, and even the so-called downside is something nobody seems to regret. So what is going on? What's stopping people? Well, Graham argues it's this big, tangled mess of fears. Some of them are legit, for sure, but a lot of them, they're just imposters. So let's start pulling on those threads. Let's actually look at the numbers here. Half the founders in that very first group, yeah, they got rich. But the really amazing part is this other bar. These are the ones who failed. Maybe their company got crushed by a giant like Google, but they weren't crushed. They learned a ton, still made some money, and just moved on to the next thing, feeling like the whole experience was totally worth it. You know that feeling of uncertainty? That giant tangled knot of what-ifs? It's completely normal. I mean, even the founders of Google felt it. The trick isn't to just ignore the fear. It's to pull on the individual threads, one by one. And once you separate them out, you can really see which ones are real problems and which ones are, well, just ghosts. And that's exactly what we're about to do. First up, let's tackle that first group of hesitations, the ones that come from that voice inside your own head. You know, your inner critic. Aha, a classic. So many would-be founders think, I'm just too young. No one's going to take me seriously. I can't possibly do this yet. But is that actually true? Paul Graham's take is that age is just the wrong thing to look at. What really matters is maturity, and his definition of maturity is simple. Have you grown out of the kid flake reflex? See, when a kid faces something hard, they can just say, I can't, and walk away. But an adult isn't allowed to flake. That's the real test, not the date on your driver's license. Okay, what about this one? This is a biggie. The fear of being too inexperienced. You're thinking, I haven't put in my 10 years at a big company. I don't know how things work. And that feels like a pretty solid reason to wait, doesn't it? But check out this twist from Graham. It's a total paradox. He says the fastest way to cure inexperience is to just start. A normal job can actually teach you the wrong things, like how to wait around for someone to give you permission. A startup, though, it's like a learning accelerator on steroids. It forces you to learn everything all at once. All right, let's hit two fears that usually show up together. The deep down worry that you just don't have the raw grit, or that you're just not smart enough to actually pull this off. Graham gives us two beautifully simple ways to check this. For determination, it's not about some fuzzy idea of willpower. The real question is, do you already find yourself building your own stuff, working on your own projects? And for intelligence? Well, his rule of thumb is awesome. If you're smart enough to even worry about whether you're smart enough, you're almost definitely smart enough. Okay, so we've dealt with the inner critic, but what about the real world, practical stuff that gets in the way? Let's switch gears and tackle those problems head on. So on the left, you see a huge myth that you need an MBA or some deep knowledge of business to get started. But the reality, over on the right, is so much simpler. At the very beginning, you have one job and one job only. Build something that people actually want. All the other stuff, the business part, you can learn as you go. Now, this one's a big deal, the co-founder problem. And Paul Graham is super clear about this. This is not some bogus fear you can just think your way out of. No, this is a real, serious problem, and it's something every single investor worries about. So, what do you do about it? Graham's advice is really direct. First, make finding a co-founder your number one absolute top priority. Be ready to move somewhere like the Bay Area if you have to. Be flexible.
Be willing to ditch your idea for a better one if it means getting the right person on board. And maybe the best advice, start when you're young, like in college, when you're literally surrounded by potential co-founders. And here's the other classic roadblock. You've got the energy, you're ready to build something, but you're just staring at a blank wall. You have no idea what to work on.
Here's a little secret. Investors like YC, they don't really bet on the idea. They bet on the founders. Why? Because they know most startups end up changing their idea completely. The thing you start with is rarely the thing that makes you successful. So where do you get a good starting point? Graham's advice is as simple as it gets. Find a problem in your own life and solve that.
Now, this isn't just some blind pep talk telling everyone to go quit their job tomorrow. Graham is really honest that there are a few very real, very legitimate roadblocks. So let's take a look at the handful of reasons that he thinks are actually a valid cause for hesitation. And here they are. If you have kids and a mortgage, yeah, the risk is totally different. If you're the kind of person who needs a boss to tell you what to do every day, a startup is definitely not for you. And you have to be ready for a multi-year grind. This isn't a short-term thing. So yeah, this is a balanced look, not just a go-for-it sermon. All right, for our final section, let's zoom all the way out. Because this whole conversation isn't just about whether you should start a company or not. Graham believes we might be in the middle of a massive historical shift in how humans even work. This timeline really puts it into perspective, right? For most of human history, the default work was farming. It was only about a century ago that the whole idea of a 9-to-5 job became the normal thing. I mean, it's a super recent invention. Graham's big idea here is that maybe, just maybe, we're at the very beginning of the next big shift, where the startup becomes the new default way to work. And that leads to maybe his most powerful idea of all. He wants us to imagine a future where people look back at our normal jobs, the commute, the meetings, the org charts, and they just wonder, how did people put up with that? The same way we might look back at a medieval peasant toiling in a field. It totally reframes what we think of as safe or normal, doesn't it? So we'll leave you with this final question to think about. Is this whole startup thing just a trend? Or is it something much, much bigger? The beginning of a fundamental change in how we all work? And if it is, what does that mean for you? Thanks for tuning in.